Chapter 38. My entry into high school made me understand the disadvantages of being the middle child. I was torn in my loyalties. When I was with Dor, I was considered a person with responsibilities, a person one looked up to, one who could dish up lessons on life. With Flor, however, I was just the dumb little sister, even though I was bigger than my big sister. Mama said I would have a big advantage in being known as Frances Bigham's little sister. Flor was doing well. She had boyfriends. She joined the clubs. She worked on the high school paper. She made the athletic teams. Now that she was out from under the shadow of her two little sisters, who had outshone her in swimming races, she was looked upon as a star. On top of all that, Mama made her beautiful clothes, saying she had a figure like Mother's. I wanted Flor to be proud of me, but she always let me know that she didn't much care for having me around. I tried out for the freshman basketball team and made it, but couldn't attend most of the games because of my swimming schedule. The coaches gave me an ultimatum: swim or play basketball, one or the other. I missed being with Dor, but our relationship had become strained. I thought it was because we were in different schools, but soon found out it was much deeper. I wanted to quit swimming, but the folks wanted me to be with Dor to keep her out of trouble. Here she was, spoiling my school athletics like she had spoiled my swimming races. Big changes were coming. I heard Papa complain to Mac. The trouble with girls is, they grow up too fast. One day, you're teaching them how to swim, then you let go for a minute and they're driving age. Mac said, "It's the same with boys, Roy. Getting them a driver's license is just the beginning. Dunny just scraped the fenders of my car and knocked down the rockery in one fell swoop. Now he complains about riding his bike to peddle papers." Papa consoled him. "You're still ahead of the game. I could never get Florence to peddle papers." It was obviously not a good time for fathers. When Flor got her driver's license, I looked upon it as a mixed blessing. At least she had to take me with her. I was with her when she fulfilled Papa's first prediction, that she was going to get a ticket if she kept driving at breakneck speed. Papa reported to Mac, "Tenny and I together in all these years haven't had a ticket." I was also with her when she fulfilled Papa's second prediction. She had her first accident. Even though it totaled both cars and sent a woman to the hospital with broken bones, I was secretly happy. It proved that Flor wasn't so perfect after all. Both Dor and I knew the accident was the result of Flor committing one of her biggest sins, being chased by boys. We were on the way home from the ice rink, and Flor was driving Mama's car, a big green 9-passenger Buick with jump seats and cut glass vases mounted on the posts. It had been special ordered by our doctor friend, Uncle Doc, but he found it too big for just him and his wife, and so he had sold it to us. Following us was a car full of boys. Dor and I, glad to be a part of any monkey shines, were egging her on. "Step on it, Flor, they're going to pass." Ordinarily, Flor was not easily influenced, but this time we felt the car leap, and we knew that the accelerator was on the floorboard, or maybe even below it. We raced for several blocks. Suddenly from a side street came a little, rickety car, and smash! When we finally stopped spinning, my first thought was that we were in real trouble. My eyes began to focus. I saw one of Mama's cut glass vases lying in the middle of the street. Then I heard the screaming. Suddenly I felt a burst of energy, and knew what I had to do. I had a hard time explaining my actions later to Papa, who kept drilling me. With a woman screaming and maybe dying in the other car, you run out in the street to retrieve a vase? Why? Because I thought Mama would feel bad if she lost it. It didn't seem consistent, considering that both cars were total wrecks. But it was the truth. Papa didn't like the idea that our only witnesses were the boys we knew at the rink. "How fast would you say Florence was driving?" he asked them. "Well, not very fast." Papa had the picture. We had been in a car race. He told Mac that Flor's driving was driving him nuts. And, "I've still got Franny coming up. Then Dorothy," Mac sympathized. "Now I've got Robbie pushing for lessons." "You're still ahead. You've got Robbie out peddling papers." The whole thing seemed to prove once and for all that girls were harder to raise than boys. Papa had still not accepted Ray Daughter's invitation for Dor and me to swim at the Washington Athletic Club, mostly because of doctor's orders that Dor not overexert herself. Despite this, Dor didn't slow down much. In fact, just for companionship, she began pacing me in the breaststroke. As the time for the 1933 Northwest Championships approached, the coaches were saying that, if Dor continued to improve, she and I would be the two swimmers to represent Crystal in the breaststroke event. Before the meet took place, however, Dorothy became involved in an affair that was to have a profound effect on her whole life. At first I knew so little, which is surprising because Dor had always confided in me. Looking back through the years, though, I have wondered what I could have done to stop it. I'm sure Mama and Papa, who knew much more than I, wondered the same thing. I first became aware of it when a Franklin baseball player who came to the house with Floor's friends began picking Dor and me up at the pool after training. He was almost 6 years older than Dor and had his own car. I soon realized that Dor was using me as a front, and I didn't like it, but didn't know what to do. The situation came to Mama and Papa's attention at the time of the senior prom. We weren't at all surprised that Floor, a graduating senior, had a date. What did surprise us, though, was when Dor, still in grade school, announced that she had an invitation to attend the senior prom as well. Papa refused his permission, but when, to everyone's surprise, I came up with a date, he consented, stressing that we would all go together and come home together. My invitation was unexpected. I was home alone and answered a knock on the door. It was Portis. I was surprised. We hadn't seen much of the neighborhood boys after we entered high school. He stood there expectantly in his clean cords and cotton shirt, so I invited him in. As I closed the door and asked him to sit down, I wondered why he had come. Although Port was handsome, I never had a crush on him. I was always a little in awe of him, and a little afraid. He had always said things to me that Mama wouldn't have approved of. Port brought me up to date on his life, saying he would be glad to be graduating from high school, and was looking forward to going to the university in the fall, where he was going into officers' training. He asked me what I planned to do, and of course, I didn't know. Finally, he asked, "Will you go to the prom with me?" I was thunderstruck. I mumbled something, but have never been sure of what. Whatever it was, it brought out an impetuous reaction in Port. He grabbed me and began kissing me. From the first kiss, I realized this was not neighborhood boy stuff. He pulled me down on the Davenport and became more insistent, pulling at my clothes. It frightened me. My only experience with kissing had been in the rumble seat with Jack, whose kisses were more friendly than passionate. Port's kisses reminded me of torrid romances. I was getting more and more terrified, wanting to scream and wrench free and run out of the house. Suddenly we heard the sound of a car in the driveway. Port released me, and I began to rearrange my clothes. When the folks came in, Port was obviously shaken, and after a few words, he left. Papa eyed me with suspicion. What was he doing here? I felt like I had committed the unpardonable sin. I didn't dare tell about the kisses, so without thinking, I said, "He asked me to go to the senior prom." Papa looked puzzled. Mama looked happy. Neither one seemed to wonder what my answer had been. Only I wondered about that. Had I agreed to go? Even if I had agreed to go, had our confrontation nullified the date? I was in complete agony. I was aware of how ironic the situation was. Port's invitation would have met Mama's approval in every way. Her aspiring suitors, as she called them, had always arrived at the door correctly dressed. She kept after me. "Fran, we need to do some planning. Even if we don't get you a new party dress, you will need a new slip. And I'm sure you need new hosiery. You always do. How anybody can get runs in their stockings like you do. You never unroll them carefully when you take them off." I had Mama mention my date to Mrs. Williams. I burned from the very center of my being, fearing that the whole story would be spreading in the neighborhood, and probably throughout the whole student body of Franklin High School. I agonized over an encounter with Port, who might say, "Oh, did you think I was serious? Ha ha. Who would want to take a dumb girl like you? A girl who doesn't even know how to kiss?" I finally confessed the whole thing to Mama. She seemed to think I was exaggerating. After all, Portis was a neighbor boy. She was pleased when I told her that Portis had knocked on the door. She inferred that I had been somewhat naive in not making my acceptance clear. Now it's just up in the air. What are you going to do? What am I going to do about what? Well, what if, on the night of the prom, Portis comes around? On the night of the prom, Portis didn't come around. Even if he had, I was in no condition to go. I was so sick with anxiety that I couldn't leave my room. The other 2 dates did come around. Even though I was relieved, I felt envious and left out. Always before, I had been the one to go with Flora and her friends. Now Dor had taken over. The foursome left together, but they didn't come home together. Flora and her date came home on time, but Dor didn't come home until some time later. Papa was livid. He confronted the boy and told him to never come back again. Of course he did. It was just the beginning. On the day of the Northwest Championships, my coach told me my stiffest competition would be Dawn Gibbon from the Washington Athletic Club. I had always beat her before, and the rest of the field wouldn't give me too much trouble. Dawn and I were assigned lanes next to each other. We both had good starts and swam neck and neck. I was giving it my all, and couldn't figure out how I would have any energy left for a final spurt, but then Dawn began to fall back. As we came into the last few yards, I had a comfortable lead. The instant I touched the wall, I realized I had beaten her. I was basking in glory. I was the Northwest champion. Wow. When I caught my breath, I became aware that the judges were huddling together, debating and checking watches. It was the nightmare of every racer, knowing that his place in a race was being disputed by a man with a stopwatch, who hopefully was able to click a little knob at the exact second that the gun sounded, and again at the exact moment a swimmer's hand hit the wall. As I pulled myself up over the side of the pool and went to get my towel, I was in confusion. How could there be any question? I had clearly beat Dawn. Then I heard the words "a swimmer in the far lane." It took me only a moment to realize who the swimmer in the far lane had been. The final decision was that Dorothy had beaten me by the barest touch. She was given first place, and I was given second. I was humiliated at being defeated by my little sister in what was considered to be my race. Even worse was the suspicion of favoritism. Nothing delighted the officials and press more than to have little Dor beat out the big girls. Once we were at home, I went directly to our bedroom. I heard Dor's footsteps behind me. Before she could speak, I lit into her. "You're always ruining my races. I don't know why I'm even still swimming." Dor shot back. "You can't blame me because you lost. What do you care anyway? You almost quit swimming earlier this season." "I would have quit if it hadn't been for Mama and Papa making me keep an eye on you. If they could trust you, I wouldn't have to always be your guardian. I could have done basketball. And you can be sure of this. I wouldn't have had you on my team." "Well, why don't you quit? You'd rather do music." That was true. Everyone knew that from the time I was small, music had been my passion. Now in high school, I was taking music theory, sang in the choir, and participated in a girls' singing group called the Ninette, which sang at school meetings and community functions. I was also playing the piano, still hunt and peck granted, practicing the system Floor had learned from the Sheik. Dor finished. "All I've got is swimming." I looked at her in disbelief. All she had was swimming? What an exaggeration. All she had was swimming and the spirit and spunk that could grab attention no matter what she did. Parents, coaches, and reporters that doted on her every move, and the perfect little body that everyone loved to point out. "Look at that cute little girl. She's going to be the world champion before she's through. I'll bet she can beat all the big girls, even her big sister." Something else was nagging me. I knew in my heart that I couldn't really blame Dor. I knew that I had been responsible for my loss. At the finish, I had done the thing we had been warned against all of our swimming days. I had taken my victory for granted. Instead of stroking hard until I hit the wall, I had coasted in. It proved to me what I had always known deep in my heart. I didn't have the do or die spirit necessary to be a champion like Dorothy did. I jumped up from the bed, ran downstairs, and faced Mama. "I'm going to quit swimming." Mama surveyed me calmly and wiped her hands on her apron. "Now, Franny, there will be other races." "No, there won't be other races. Dor can go on without me." What I couldn't have imagined was that Dor wouldn't go on without me. The reasons are hard for me to sift through. At the time, I only knew that Dor was involved with this new boyfriend in a way I didn't want to imagine. Being at odds with Dor was so difficult. We had always had our disagreements, but never anything serious. We had shared so much of our lives, and now I realized that she had someone else to share her secrets with. Then, one day, Papa brought home another of his fire sale surprises that took my mind off of my sorrows and changed my life far more than the dishwasher, the water wings, the machinery, or even the radio. Papa sat down with it in his lap. It kind of wobbled around like a cat that wants to get away. Papa did what he called strapping himself in and then began to punch some buttons. Zippo, the thing WS making music. I was enthralled. "It's an accordion," Mama said. Papa would practice on the back porch, which had been enclosed and opened up to the kitchen so that we had one big room. He said that he wanted to play some of the old tunes he didn't hear on the radio. He liked to be around when Mama was clattering the pots and pans. "It's smelling good, Mama," he'd say. Mama would be crying over the onions, not his music. She was a great one to cry over onions. "It must be Irish stew." Before long, Papa was accompanying his singing. "When Irish eyes are smiling, sure 'tis like a morn in spring." Papa's friends encouraged him to play and sing, but no one liked it better than I. As long as he would play, I would sit and listen, and sing his songs with him. managing to forget our differences. When Papa had his bouts with arthritis and was confined to bed, he set his accordion on his cedar chest, waiting for the day when he could play it again. One day, after I had rubbed his swollen joints, he told me to put it on. He gave me some instructions. I was fascinated. Soon I learned to play his songs, and he was delighted. I was delighted too. My fellowship with Papa was helping to fill the void left by the strained relationships with my sisters. We were a family that always felt it was of the utmost importance to fix blame, the assignment of cause, as Papa often called it. This probably came from Papa's profession, his constant questioning. One day, we girls were to experience one of our biggest scares, which was also one of the most bewildering. The blame was so varied and widespread that no one knew where to lay it. It was one of those rare occasions when the folks left for an overnight trip and had left us alone without a paid companion. They seldom did this because they had to leave Flor in charge. Although she was reliable in most cases, she often broke the rule about having friends over when the folks were away. We had just said goodbye to Kermit and Jack, and were ready to let Wolf out to brush his teeth before bed, when we heard a crash in the basement, and Wolf set up an awful commotion. This was not entirely new. We occasionally heard explosions of bottles of home brew that had been bottled too early. Then, we began to hear voices. Now we knew that someone had broken in the door. We were as frightened as we had been on the night when we slept in the car. We huddled together in the pantry, clutching onto Wolf, desperate to have him near if someone attacked us. Then, we heard heavy footsteps on the stairs. The voices were obviously calling to us. "We're here to get your old man's booze. If you don't come down and show us where it is, we'll come in and get you." I think it was only Wolf's howling that kept them from fulfilling that threat. We heard them breaking into the little room, yelling epithets about old man Bigham's booze. Eventually we heard them leave, but it wasn't until the next day that we had the courage to go down and survey the damage. The basement door had been broken down. Bottles and utensils were strewn everywhere. Most of the beer had been carted off. We tried to straighten things up, thinking maybe we could hide the damage. But when the folks came home the next day, the first thing Mama said was, "Why didn't you call the police?" We all knew why we hadn't called the police. Did you have company? We had to answer yes. Was Kermit and Jack here? We had to answer yes. We all felt sure that Kermit and Jack were not involved in the break-in, but we reasoned that they had casually mentioned to their older brother or someone in the Holly Street gang that we were home alone. We never knew for sure because Papa never called the police. After the break-in, Papa went into a deep depression. We hardly dared speak to him, especially after he announced that the mansion had been sold. We were all devastated. Mama asked questions, but Papa said there was not much to talk about. Sometime later, however, through gossip at the garden club, Mama learned about the new occupant of the house. She and Mrs. Williams discussed it when they returned home, although it was Mrs. Williams who did most of the talking. Of course, everyone knows that these illegal operations are performed somewhere, but to realize that someone in your own neighborhood is committing this unthinkable sin. If Mrs. Landis were still the mayor, you can be sure that this crime against women would not be tolerated. That night, Mama, devastated and shocked, addressed Papa. "You would sell it to someone like that." Papa replied, "Someone like that is the only kind of person that has any money these days." I dread the thought that the ladies in the garden club might learn that you, she paused to emphasize her point, you, a supposedly law-abiding attorney, were involved in the sale. Papa answered, "I'm sorry that I might bring such great shame upon you, but know this. I, a supposedly law-abiding attorney, had very little to do with it." Although I realized what an emotional impact the affair was having, I had little understanding of what it all meant. I didn't hear any more about it until sometime later, when I heard an angry doctor mention it to Mama.